Hi there maple fans, and in this series of videos I'll be sharing what I do throughout an entire year on a monthly basis. Please note that these months are based on UK timings, but of course can easily be adapted to anywhere else in the world. So today I'm going to be talking about watering, wind tolerance and great location in your garden for Japanese maples. Nearly got caught out because it's been very wet this April in the UK, and lo and behold, some need watering straight away. So here's one of my favourite sherry swarts, lots of foliage, fully leafed out into a okay plant pot size. That needed watering. On the other hand, you've got the Baihu tree here, which still hasn't leafed out yet. So this one typically is slow to leaf out in the UK at least. What we can see from here is that the water meter is reading absolutely fine. So these are little meters I've mentioned before in previous videos. I would get one. I'm not saying they're 110% accurate, but they're a guide and that can be really useful. So in the case of this Twombley's Red Sentinel, for example, again, you've got a heap of foliage on there. It's not just sticks in a pot like it was a while back. You just about see there the meters reading extremely low. Don't mind running them low because it makes the roots hungry for more water, and that in turn is going to promote root growth and a healthy tree overall. So the golden rule really is to remember you're watering a tree, not a pot. So in the winter these virtually need no water at all, and depending on how much they fill the pot, the size of the pot relative to the tree, there's all sorts of variables going on here. You need to make an informed decision, and I think those little meters kind of do that. That one there is okay, a little splash of water possibly, but it's not really dehydrated at all. And we come on to Taylor here, which is again a gorgeous little tree. And it's absolutely fine because it may be slightly over potted really, to be honest, my naughty habit. But looking at that, it doesn't need anything. And there's a real danger of kind of giving them too much water unnecessarily. Whereas this Makai Yatsubutsa is, it's not a big tree, but wow, there's so much foliage there. The wind's going to play over it and that's going to have an effect. Which brings me quite nicely onto the subject of wind and Japanese maples. So we've got Hubb's Red Willow here, absolutely gorgeous tree. Would love some more of these linearly loben ones. Did actually buy one the other day, that will be in the next video. But again, the effect on these will be fairly negligible. What's coming is I'll leave the soundtrack on the original soundtrack I recorded because you'll get that ambience and a feel for what the wind actually sounded like. So a windy day in the Midlands in the UK today. And just to sort of observe what the wind does to these trees, it's an unusual direction because it's not coming from the north where my gate sort of helps mitigate that, but it's coming over this fence. So the first thing I'll say is you've got little Shana here who, because it's a very tight compact structure, he's like pretty much rock solid. There's the tiniest bits of movement there, but that's going to work in our favour because it's not being blown around, the movement's not being amplified as it sort of resonates with the movements of the branches, and the wind's having very little effect really. Then we come to Kota no Ito, which is a gorgeous little tree and something really different in the Acer world. But yeah, blown around to a degree, but I think these tiny strap-like leaves let the wind kind of pass through it. And actually the amount of evaporation from every leaf is going to be really low. When you come to red wine here, which is a stunning tree actually, really lovely variegated leaves. One of these that you'd think you'd see more of because it's such a lovely cultivar. With this upturned vase habit and this very sort of spindly nature, that's moving around all over the place. Now at this time of year, it's still pretty early. It's kind of only mid-April in the UK, and it's a pretty cold, cool day. So the water that it's pulling through its roots, that's going to go all the way up to the top there, and get evaporated, it should sort of cope with that. But if I don't sort of move that or take heatance really, then potentially that's going to get very sort of windburnt, as I would say. So it's that combination of the hot, drying winds and temperature. It's sort of temperature and the wind together that dries things out. a bit like dry washing really. You don't need just a windy day, you also need a day that's got some warmth as well, or both really. And then compare this fella here to this lovely cultivar Shishigashira, and it's not phased at all. Again, there's even less movement. It just isn't moving. So it's hard to see how that's going to be affected by sort of drying winds really. And this cultivar is really well known for being very heat tolerant. But I think part of the key is it just doesn't move when that warm air passes over it. I think the lace leaves generally do better as well because they are lower to the ground. So admittedly I've got this up on a bit of a stand really. But merely the fact they're quite low, that can be sort of beneficial too. Cripsy, again, virtually no movement whatsoever. And then if you just come through, this is the sector of filigree, Atropopyrium, another one, and some of the trees down here. Yeah, but by their nature you can sort of see there's a bit more movement going on. This little princess actually, I think it's called Kotohime is the Japanese name. Gorgeous little tree. And tiny little leaves, and it's almost an automatic bonsai. It's sort of done its own thing. It actually, I broke a limb off it, a tiny little limb off it when it was very young, and it sort of seemed to have helped almost. It's kind of grown out kind of sideways, which is what it does. So that will form a not very tall, very wide, dense, lovely Acer really. So again, when you've got these bigger, this is Acer Palmatum sazanami, which again is a sort of big shaggy monster, and it's grown immensely. It's done really well, but it's going to get blown around quite a little bit really. Makawa Yatsubusa, again known for sun tolerance, but is it just the sun? Is it the wind as well? Because it just doesn't move around. It's such a dense, lush sort of green foliage that it's not going to get affected that much. Likewise with the upturned habit of Jerry Swartz, which looks lovely in the sunlight, I must say really. In this position it always stays pink. It's just got enough sunlight, which is fantastic. Some of these cultivars, if you don't give them enough sunlight, they'll go green because they produce more chlorophyll to compensate. But as you can see, it's got a really dense, deeply dense structure to it, and it's quite tight, so not too much movement going on there. Suryu, again the only upright sort of cut leaf maple that exists as far as I know. But again, it's unusual because the palmatums next to it get blown away more. I mean, this does get blown around, but I think because they're little cut leaves, it should really be a sort of dissectum, low to the ground tree. But this crazy beast actually grows up. Really renowned for being a very sun tolerant maple. But once again, I wonder whether it's because the air passes through these so much better than it would be a palmate leaf. Well, a good, fantastic tree really. Just coming around here, it really does get blown around a lot. But I don't know if you can see that, but the light through the leaves is just fantastic really. Not named Bloodgood, believe it or not, because of its colour, but rather just because it was found by a Mr. Bloodgood in America years ago. So how extraordinary. There we are, going green over there. Again, a similar story, sort of quite a lot of movement, but again slightly smaller leaves, perhaps not affected quite so much, and so on and so forth really. So if you look at this Arcontifolium, again I would suspect that as that got bigger, and it's in a fairly sheltered location anyway, which is fine, but with these big sort of blustery leaves, it just get blown around kind of a lot more than some of its neighbours, to be honest. There's a dissectum over there. Again, a classic sort of weeping habit. and those cut leaves should do really well in high winds. There's an interesting one here. This is Cascade Ruby. Again, these little cascading plants are very, very interesting. As I say, they usually do quite well in certainly Ryusen, which is the sort of daddy of these plants, does really well in full sun. But again, is it because of its shape? Is it because of how it's affected by drying winds, really? Whereas Jordan is kind of different. Hasn't quite sort of finished leafing out, but it's lovely how it sort of does this little umbrella thing and leaves out in that way. Really nice green colours. But with Jordan, it's a rather different kettle of fish, because it really doesn't like direct sunlight on its leaves. So even though it was in a windless, well-sheltered environment, it will still burn. Whereas other cultivars of the same ilk, like Moonrise and stuff like that, they are much more tolerant, to be honest with you. This one I repotted very recently. And PV Dave, yeah, nice cultivar, to be honest with you. And since it seems to have grown even since the other day, am I imagining this? But yeah, lovely tree. And so on to some of the others. It's quite interesting, actually. I'll just show you this ticket, but Shinta Shoujo, classic maple of a very old pedigree, really. And behind it, Migashidara, which is this really unusual purpley colour. That colour will probably develop as the season goes on. Katsura, again, put the other side of the garden down by the fence, and it got sort of quite badly burnt last year. Recovered perfectly well, so you could say it's tolerant, but there's a big difference between tolerate and enjoy, I suppose, really. And that's Moonrise, actually, which is it's a lovely shape as well. I think it's sort of a ball shape. But the Shiraswanums is interesting. They tend to sort of leaf out a bit later in general. And again, interestingly, if you give that some sun, it just makes the colours even better, which is fantastic. And we'll just finish with a favourite, really, which is Ukagumo. I do say it's my favourite a lot, I know, because I love them all for different reasons, I suppose. But one of these trees everyone should have, but a lot of shade required to keep it a sort of lovely pale white colour that it is. So we'll have another look at that later on when it's leafed out a bit more. But the sort of greeny white colours, just fantastic, really, on the Ukagumo. So here we have Orange Dream, and this one's in the ground. Much bigger than its brother. I mean, its brother is kind of half the height and half the width of this in a pot, and it really has done beautifully well. I mean, this has been featured in some of my other videos, and it's almost overhanging the path now. So this is a clay soil, but since it got established really well and it's in a great location, especially in terms of having shade, so the sun will literally set behind that wall, and consequently now it's in shade all afternoon, and this tree absolutely loves that. And wow, the foliage is so thick and lush. It's quite unusual almost for an Acer, to be honest with you. But I think with clay soils, it's full of nutrients, in fact. So if you can actually give the plant enough drainage and stuff like that, so it's not going to get waterlogged, it's helping itself to a bundle of nutrients and putting on an amazing growth spurt. We can see here, actually, perhaps a little bit, where my hand is here, that's kind of the old growth, and already this season this is all sort of quite tender kind of new stuff, really. So it's growing at a potentially alarming rate, to be honest with you, but I don't mind. It's also just to note that even though it's by the house, these are completely non-invasive roots. I think eventually, if it gets so big, it will start to be slightly restricted because it's in a sort of little border, really. But yeah, very pleased to to have that tree and to have it in the right location. I had problems in this border before because the soil, as I say, is clay, doesn't drain very well. Actually, this was already about 3 or 4 years old when I planted it, and I think that's really helped. And as I move back into the back garden, guess what? One of my trees is blown over. It's why I use heavy compost. It's why I use heavy pots. But nonetheless, no harm done. Just popped him back up again, really. I'll look into getting some proper stakes for the ground if this is going to happen a lot. As I said, they're pretty flexible. They bounce pretty well, so no harm done there, to be honest.